Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for June 7th, 2024. While much of the world is in an uproar over the continued slaughter conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces against the people of Palestine, and while there's discussion about will there be nukes used or not, as the West is escalating the provocations against Russia and Ukraine, there's an extremely important conference underway in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. It's attended by thousands of people from over 130 countries. And the major topic is the dialogue to both end war, but expand the range of mutual economic cooperation. President Putin was there to deliver an address to welcome people. He did a 3-hour press conference. And one of the things he was asked is, does he expect there'll be improvements in the Russian and U.S. relationship? And he said he didn't rule out improvements in U.S.-Russian relations if the U.S. starts to focus on its own interests, unquote. He said he believes that public opinion is moving that way, prioritizing national interests. And if that really takes on some momentum, then things might change. He said public sentiment can play a decisive role in outflanking the globalist warhawks. Now, this was a message that was reflected by Helga Zepp-LaRouche in her own webcast dialogue with me on Wednesday of this week, where she said that people must become the peacemakers. And she was also interviewed in Tass, and the interview there appeared as this conference was taking place. And what she said is that she agrees with Putin about the needed change in U.S. policy toward adopting a new security and development architecture, which she has been championing for the last years. But in this, she highlighted the role the BRICS alliance is playing and said the United States must be brought into that alliance. In her summation, according to Tass, she said, quote, "The peoples of the world need a beautiful idea," unquote, that would allow them, quote, "to dream about a better future," unquote. Now, much of the talk about the better future of cooperation rather than threats, bullying, and sanctions is centered around the BRICS. Dilma Rousseff, the president of the BRICS New Development Bank, is there in St. Petersburg, as are many bankers and businessmen looking forward to the potential for the expansion of cooperation with Eurasia. And this was discussed by Putin and others as the next BRICS summit will be in Kazan in October of this year. Now, there are many questions about what we can expect from the BRICS, and I'm going to take up 3 questions that have been asked frequently and that I received from some of our listeners and viewers over the last couple of days. These questions are, what exactly is the BRICS? What was LaRouche's role in shaping this idea of the BRICS? And will the BRICS create a new international currency? So on the first question, the BRICS were initially 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. At their meeting last August, they initiated membership for 6 other countries, one of which was Argentina, which has now rejected it under the radical free market Malay government. The other new members were Egypt, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia. These are not all consolidated yet, but it's interesting. Take a look at the map and look where Gaza is, and look at these countries I just mentioned: Egypt, Iran, UAE, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia. That's the target area. Do you think that the escalation of the fighting there has anything to do with an attempt to disrupt the BRICS? Now, there are 30 more other nations requesting to join, including Indonesia, Algeria, Nigeria, and the BRICS as a whole have an enormous potential future, especially as you have countries such as the oil producing countries, some of which have development funds and national currency funds, which could be used for the projects of the new development bank of the BRICS. Now, to get to the second question, where did the BRICS come from? A lot of credit is given to a Goldman Sachs analyst named Jim O'Neill, who provided a report. He presided over a group that wrote a report in 2001. And the proposal was based on the idea that Brazil, Russia, India, and China are growing economies, and they should be incorporated in some way in the G7. And people say, well, therefore, that's the origin of the BRICS. Well, the intent is what you have to look at. Yes, those are the right countries, the same countries that LaRouche initially talked about. But his idea was to co-opt them, to bring them in as partners in the G7, which at this point would mean that they would be forced to surrender some of their sovereignty and go along with the green agenda, which was what has been pushed by the G7. Now, instead, the thing you have to ask yourself is, well, what is the intent of the BRICS? For LaRouche, it's very clear. And I'm going to be including some links in the description box of several articles on LaRouche's various speeches and writings that took up this question of what became the BRICS. But his idea was that you had to address taking power away from the Anglo-Dutch liberal system of free trade and deindustrialization as the goal of the green policy. And what LaRouche said is that there are only a few countries in the world powerful enough to do that, and which would have the intent to do that. You know, Germany or Japan could play a role, but they're completely subordinate to the United States and the United Kingdom. So you take Russia, China, India initially, and then add Brazil, and then later South Africa. And now you have a core of nations with both the power and also the commitment to sovereignty and the commitment to development of other countries that could then serve to provide an alternative to the blackmail and threats and sanctions of the existing dollar-based system. Just to give you a couple of key moments in this, in December 1989, the LaRouche organization, especially under Helga and Lynn's direction, put forward a proposal for what was called the productive triangle, how to deal with the collapse of the Soviet system, and how to take the area between Paris, Vienna, and Berlin and turn that into spiral arms going into Eastern Europe to allow for the economic development of those areas, freed from the communist system. Now, this was an attractive idea. It was a proposal which was somewhat reflected in one by Alfred Herrhausen of Deutsche Bank, who unfortunately was assassinated just as the wall was coming down. But LaRouche was putting this forward as an idea that the potential in the East could be realized through an alliance with the West. That's what geopoliticians of the British stripe have always been opposed to. The idea of a European alliance with Eurasia was the greatest threat to their empire, and they saw that as something that had to be stopped. Now, another major point in the development of this alternative system was in 1996, when Helga Zepp-LaRouche put forward a proposal building the Silk Road land bridge, the basis for the mutual security interests of Asia and Europe. And this was a part of an initiative to expand beyond the productive triangle. Keep in mind, 96 was what? The period of the shock therapy attack on Russia, the destruction of the Russian economy. And there were Russians who were looking for an alternative. And it was at this moment that the LaRouches represented the one serious alternative. In January 1997, then, Helga put out another article, The Eurasian Land Bridge, the New Silk Road. And this began to grow. It incorporated the idea that later was that of the Belt and Road Initiative, but continues to be this idea of an East-West collaboration. Now, at the same time, you had in Russia a reaction against the shock therapy of Yeltsin, which, as I think Jeffrey Sachs, one of the people who was involved in it at the time, said was more shock, less therapy. That is, there was no credit for development for these countries. Well, Yevgeny Primakov, the prime minister of Russia from 1998 to 99, put forward an idea of an alliance between Russia, India, and China. And this was picked up by Lyndon LaRouche in 2001 on a series of visits he made to Moscow, where he met with economists, scientists, and historians, and put forward the idea that became the BRICS alliance. Another moment in this was a webcast that LaRouche did in 2008, which was after the October 2008 blowout. The webcast was titled The Four-Power Agreement in its World Context. And what he called for is Russia, India, China, and the US to work together toward this new system. And this is what we're fighting for today. The BRICS is going. It's not stoppable. The question is, will the United States try to stop it? Or will the United States recognize that the true interest of the United States would be to join with the BRICS? Which brings us to the final question. Is there a new BRICS currency in the process of being developed? Well, the reality is that it's out of necessity that certain things are underway. A new system for trade and settling imbalances outside of the dollar system. That's already in process. The use of national currencies rather than the dollar, that's already in process. And that the idea of a new currency is that it would have to be backed by something physical. Not just gold and silver, but it could be wheat, it could be fertilizer, it could be strategic metals, all of which exist in abundance in Eurasia. So what we're looking toward is whether there will be cooperation or opposition from the dollar-based world. In the best of all possible worlds, the dollar would be part of the mix, and the US would be part of this because the US still has capabilities in science and technology and productive capacity that would be very important for establishing the development perspective needed for the Southern Hemisphere. But the Global South is not going to wait for the United States to become more beneficent. And so the BRICS are looking at various options, various opportunities, and they're moving very aggressively. And I'd urge you to read the articles I'll link in the description section to get more on this. So this is where we stand now. A new security and development architecture or war and chaos. And it's up to you to decide.